You're listening to the Cyberwire Network, powered by N2K.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Caveat, N2K Cyberwire's privacy, surveillance, law, and policy podcast. I'm Dave Bittner, and joining me is my co-host Ben Yellen from the University of Maryland Center for Health and Homeland Security. Hey there, Ben.
Hello, Dave.
On today's show, Ben discusses the ongoing battle between Elon Musk and a Brazilian judge over content moderation on X Twitter. I look at a potential challenge to Section 230 immunity. While this show covers legal topics and Ben is a lawyer, the views expressed do not constitute legal advice. For official legal advice on any of the topics we cover, please contact your attorney. Hey everybody, Dave here. Have you ever wondered where your personal information is lurking online? Like many of you, I was concerned about my data being sold by data brokers. So I decided to try Delete Me. I have to say, Delete Me is a game changer. Within days of signing up, they started removing my personal information from hundreds of data brokers. I finally have peace of mind knowing my data privacy is protected. Delete Me's team does all the work for you with detailed reports, so you know exactly what's been done. Take control of your data and keep your private life private by signing up for Delete Me. Now at a special discount for our listeners. Today, get 20% off your Delete Me plan when you go to joindeleteme.com/N2K and use promo code N2K at checkout. The only way to get 20% off is to go to joindeleteme.com/N2K and enter code N2K at checkout. That's joindeleteme.com/N2K, code N2K. All right, Ben, you want to kick us off with the big old story about our favorite billionaire?
Yeah, it's quite a story. There is a battle taking place between Elon Musk, the owner of X Twitter, and a Brazilian judge who might be the only person more hostile to Elon Musk than I am.
Okay, fair enough.
Even though, as I'm going to reveal to you, I'm actually on Musk's side in this dispute. So the judge is somebody by the name of Alexander de Moraes. I'm going to set the scene before we get into the particulars here,
Please.
And it's going to sound somewhat familiar.
Okay.
So Brazil elected a populist right-wing president in the late 2010s. He was defeated for re-election by the previous president, an old guy by the name of Luis Lula da Silva.
Wow.
The losing party in the election, with some encouragement from the losing candidate, stormed the Brazilian capital, and there were riots and mass arrests.
Wow.
So yes, if that's sounding familiar, it is.
History doesn't repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme.
History certainly rhymes. It was happening around the same period that we were going through the 2020 election stuff here. So certainly there are parallels there. So Brazil has taken action through its judiciary, and in particular through this one Supreme Court justice, to demand that X Twitter censor content on its platform. This is specifically around misinformation on that recent presidential election. I believe it was in 2022. So relating to that and relating to the ensuing riots that happened at the Capitol. Elon Musk, as you can imagine, is very hostile to these requests/demands for content moderation. He has established X Twitter as a platform that adheres to free speech absolutism, or so he says.
Right.
So he rejected this judge's demand to start to censor some of this content, and the demands were very specific. Musk not only said no, but he closed down the physical Twitter offices in Brazil because this judge was threatening Musk and Twitter employees with arrests if they did not comply with these content moderation demands. So Musk got shut down the office, got everybody to leave, And then the judge raised the ante and said, fine, we are going to shut down or block access to X across the entire nation of Brazil, which has 200 million people. Because Musk moved the office, X Twitter has no physical presence in Brazil, and therefore, according to Brazilian law, cannot operate within that country. He took it a step further by threatening fines and penalties to Google and Apple if they allow people to download X through their app stores. And I think most dramatically, he has ordered the telecom providers in Brazil to prevent people from using a VPN to access Twitter.
And it's a hefty fine, right? It's like
$5,000, I believe, or $9,000.
Yeah.
Per incident. So obviously that can add up quickly.
Right.
And most people, that would be a significant fine that nobody would want to pay.
Sure.
And obviously people use VPNs for all different types of reasons. One, for privacy, but also obviously for security purposes.
And to get their out-of-market baseball teams.
No comment on that one. To any law enforcement officials listening to this, that is not something that I do.
Right.
So this is a pretty drastic decision by this judge. The portion of the decision relating to VPNs, I think there's some question about whether that's going to be enforced, or whether this judge has the power to enforce it.
Mm-hmm.
But this is a major inhibition on free speech in Brazil. To shut down this platform to 200 million people is, I think, a pretty drastic step for this judge to take. In seeking to punish Elon Musk and the company of Twitter, he's actually punishing potentially 200 million people who want to use this very popular platform and be involved in an international conversation on issues. Twitter is, I think, very central to political discourse. For better or worse, a lot of political ideas, political controversies start on Twitter, and I think it carries that extra weight when we're talking about the entire platform being shut down. And the fact that this is just, seemingly to me, an overzealous Brazilian Supreme Court justice making these rather rash decisions, all because Musk refused content moderation, not on anything that we would deem in the United States to be illegal, like something like child pornography, which potentially you saw in the Giraffe case that we talked about last week, but on election misinformation, which I'm against election misinformation. But I think as we saw in the 2020 election, you run into complicated issues there. One person's misinformation is another person's political talking point. I think you'd start to go down quite a slippery slope when certain political arguments are prohibited on a platform. So I think Musk has the high ground narrowly on that issue. And I think this Brazilian justice is wrong. Having said that, I think in many ways Musk has brought this upon himself. For one, he's very inconsistent about enforcing this town square where free speech rules, and there's this free speech absolutism. If you have any doubts about that, try typing the word cisgender into Twitter. That word has been banned, and the tweet will be suppressed. It'll be hidden by the algorithms if you happen to use that word in the tweet, which I think is insane. It's not an offensive word. It's a word to describe somebody who identifies as the same, or who identifies with the gender that I'm bad at being woke, with the sex that they were assigned at birth.
Right.
He just has
all the best intentions, Ben, right? All the best intentions.
Yeah. He just has a problem with the word because he's pretty biased, frankly, against transgender people. So he decided that he was going to censor this word, which seems completely arbitrary, given that there's a lot of, for example, Nazi propaganda on this site. So the fact that he's inconsistent in enforcing what he determines to be free speech codes. So there's that. And then he has just turned this platform overtly political in his own tweets. Conservatives used to complain, I think with some justification, that a lot of the owners of these platforms infused politics into their tweets, into their Facebook posts. Even if some of these tech oligarchs weren't ostensibly political, I think some of the content became political, and that bothered conservatives. Even taking a position in the George Floyd protests and saying something like Black Lives Matter, that's a political position, and it does have the potential to alienate a significant portion of your user base, of your customer base. Musk has thrown that out the window. I mean, his entire Twitter feed is agitprop for former President Trump and his campaign. He's reposting memes, talking points, using AI to create images of Kamala Harris dressed as a communist from the USSR. And he's alienated, I think, some of the very people who might otherwise stand up for him and stand up for the prospect of protecting free speech rights here and around the world. The guy sold electric cars and is hemorrhaging money because everybody who might have bought a Tesla for environmental reasons now hates him because of his Twitter feed.
Right.
Because he's allowed such offensive content like Nazi propaganda on Twitter, advertisements have been fleeing. And so when Musk makes an argument about free speech, even if that argument as it is here is legitimate, it is coded as right-wing because of Musk's own behavior on the platform. And I think that's very bad for everybody. I think this actually is a major free speech battle, but I understand people rolling their eyes and saying, oh, this is just Elon Musk wanting to allow election disinformation on this platform. Why should I care about it? And frankly, Musk has brought that upon himself.
Yeah, to me, he has done away with any sort of consistent policy approach to what is and is not acceptable on X Twitter.
Yeah,
right?
and it undermines him when he tries to adjudicate court cases because it just seems so arbitrary.
Right.
If you are truly going to be a bastion of free speech, if you believe in free speech absolutism, you don't just randomly ban words on your website that you don't like, especially when all different types of what 99% of people would determine to be offensive content is easily spread 24/7. There is a level of arbitrariness to it based on his own views and his own whims.
Right.
Which is exactly what people were criticizing before Musk bought Twitter. And those very same people seem to kind of like it now that Musk is in control.
That it swings their way.
It swung their way, yeah. So I just think he would have more public legitimacy in this dispute if he would just shut up on his own Twitter feed for a couple of weeks and stand up broadly for free speech principles as a non-ideological concept and not turn his Twitter account and his platform into what it has become, which is a propaganda arm for his politics, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, he is his own worst enemy when it comes to many of these things. Like you mentioned, the many, many people who would have considered purchasing a Tesla no longer will. In fact, I've seen Teslas with bumper stickers that say, sorry, I bought this before I knew about Elon.
Yep. I've seen that many times.
Right. So, and yeah, I mean, to be fair, there are plenty of people out there. I've been to barbecues and cookouts where people are singing the praises of his success. That is something to be emulated, that, you can't argue with his success.
And in some ways you can't. I mean, he has been extraordinarily successful. SpaceX stepped into a void where our government in the early 2010s really stopped providing significant financial support to space exploration. And that's been revived with SpaceX, even though Musk is very critical of government spending, except when they spend on contracts for his businesses. Obviously, I think there was a major environmental justification for Teslas. Back 10 years ago, what he was saying is you can have a cool car and still protect the environment. And there was a lot of promise in that.
Yeah, and I think there's no question that Tesla moved things forward much more quickly than they otherwise would have. Had we been relying on, the big automakers to push electrical cars forward, it would not have happened nearly as quickly if not for an outsider like Tesla coming along and making it happen. So, yeah, I mean,
absolutely.
But you could also look at that and say it's consistent in that he is a chaos agent. Right?
He is.
And sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. And I will say, as someone who left Twitter because, I could no longer abide by contributing to what I saw as, the decline of that platform and the things that it allowed. I didn't want my own content to be side by side with that. That's what you get.
It is what you get. Part of it is he has so much money that he doesn't really care or have any reason to care that Twitter has lost money. And the investors who supported his bid have lost money since he acquired Twitter in 2022. Because I think the money doesn't matter to him. He has the platform now. And he's been red-pilled by politics. He tweets things that are very wild. For example, yesterday he talked about how basically the world has to be controlled not only by alpha males, but by neurodivergent alpha males because nobody else can properly understand the difference between truth and lies. Like, that is a extremely bizarre thing to say on the platform. And that is
Right.
what we see every day from Elon Musk.
Yeah.
And I think it's because he's not concerned about losing money or losing advertisers. He's still going to be a billionaire. So he has the right as the owner of this platform to regulate it as he sees fit. In some circumstances, particularly in more authoritarian countries, he has willingly complied with government demands. We saw that in India, where there was a documentary critical of a former Indian prime minister. The Indian government wanted that censored, and Musk complied with that demand. Certainly, we've seen that in China as well. And then he's fighting tooth and nail in Brazil. And for me, it's hard to disentangle his own ideology and his own political desires from these fights and the inconsistency in pursuing these fights. And I think it undermines the entire message that I think should be a powerful message that we need to protect free speech.
What other avenues would he have had in Brazil?
He could have said, I do not support this type of censorship, but we, on a neutral basis, decided that we would comply with the laws and the judicial decisions of every country in which our service is available. And so we will consistently abide by those decisions. Again, now, that might undermine his credibility with a certain set because he wouldn't be taking a fight to this overeager Brazilian judge, but that certainly was an option to him. And you wouldn't have this escalation that now leads to 200 million Brazilians unable to access this platform at all. So he could have done that. I'm not sure what the other avenues would have been. I think if he had managed this type of incident from a PR perspective in a more neutral way, talking positively about the values of free speech, instead of what his own platform has become and what his own tweets have become, he'd have more credibility. And maybe that would have made a difference in some of these judicial proceedings. Because it seems like this judge just really dislikes him, which should not be the basis for a judicial decision. But I think that probably factors into it.
Didn't the judge, though, I mean, my understanding is the Brazilian Supreme Court has upheld this judge's decision.
They have. Most of the Supreme Court judges in Brazil, if I'm not mistaken, have been appointed by Lula, the left-wing successor to the Bolsonaro government. So they are in opposition to Musk and to people who are loyal to Bolsonaro. But yes, they did uphold this. So it adds some legitimacy to it. And that doesn't mean, to me, at least in my opinion, it doesn't mean it's the right decision.
Right.
I still think it's a really drastic for any country, particularly one that wants to fashion itself as a democracy, to block such a platform. We're not beyond such things either. I mean, we are currently in an effort to block TikTok in this country, depending on whether ByteDance is sold to an American investor over the next several months. So, and that's going to go through our legal system. But I just think as a general principle, blocking a popular social media platform in an entire country is an overeager response to legitimate concerns about online content. And I think it would be great to have a broader conversation about the appropriate extent to which we should force these companies to moderate content on their sites. I think that's a very worthy international conversation. I don't like seeing owners and operators of social media sites arrested when they're, even if I don't like them personally, I don't like to see them arrested for failing to comply with these orders. So it would be great if we could have that productive conversation instead of having some of these drastic court rulings.
I saw over the weekend as well that Musk tweeted something about it was sort of a veiled threat to Brazil's president about like that the U.S. was going to confiscate his plane or something. Like
because the U.S. confiscated the plane of Maduro, the
right.
president of Venezuela.
Right.
So Musk is like, I hope Lula likes flying commercial because we're going to confiscate his plane, which, fine.
It's not helpful.
It's not helpful. And it's also like Musk, who has implied that the current presidential administration are a bunch of radical left-wing communists. He thinks they're going to be the ones who are going to fulfill his request to seize this Brazilian plane. Because certainly Musk can't do it himself. That's not within his power.
Let me ask you this, though, Ben. I mean, do you think that part of your opinion on this, thinking of X-Twitter specifically, part of your thinking on this could be a nostalgia for the Twitter that was versus the Twitter that is? In other words, I don't think there's any question that Twitter is in a tailspin right now, and it is heading for the ground. How are they going to fund it? So if this is a catalyst for the people in Brazil to find another platform, arguably a better platform, because there are other platforms out there now. Twitter's not the only game in town.
That's true. They're going to go on Mastodon with you, Dave.
You go to Blue Sky. I mean, there are multiple choices who have tried to fill the gap when Twitter took the turn that it took. So do you think that that's a fair question of me to ask you? Are you thinking of the Twitter that was versus the Twitter that is?
In some ways, I am. I have nostalgia, even though the pre-Musk Twitter wasn't perfect and certainly made its share of mistakes.
Right.
Yeah, I have that nostalgia. There are a lot of people, you among them, who I used to follow who left the site, and that makes the quality of my feed significantly worse. And they did that because of the actions that Musk has taken. But I do think it goes beyond my own nostalgia. There are network effects. The fact that everybody else is on Twitter, and including the most powerful people in the world. If you think about how Joe Biden ended his presidential campaign, it was not on Mastodon.
Right.
It was not on Blue Sky. So it does still have that cachet because so many other important people use it that it's hard to just completely cut off the platform and expect that you'll immediately find an adequate replacement, in my opinion. In the long term, absolutely. But in the short term, I just think it's unrealistic that an alternative that has the same network of people that you rely on for content, that's just going to prop up in the meantime. I just don't see that happening.
How do you think it's going to play out from here?
I really don't know. I think this is just going to be kind of a staring contest between Musk and the Brazilian Supreme Court, and we're going to see who's going to blink first. They seem pretty adamant that X-Twitter is going to be banned in that country, and I don't see them backing down. I also, considering Musk and his ideological commitments, I don't see him backing down either. So kind of the equilibrium here, looking at it from a game theory perspective, is that there will be no more Twitter in Brazil. So for those of you who are football fans, there's going to be a football game, NFL game in Brazil on Friday. And the American reporters who generally tweet about what's going on at a game while they're there will be unable to do that. So if you don't think this affects you personally, there's...
Bring it home, Ben. Bring it home.
There's one way that it might affect you personally.
Yeah. All right. Well, time will tell. We'll keep an eye on this one. It's certainly an interesting development. It's 200 million potential customers, right?
That's a lot of people.
Just cut off.
I mean, it's one of the, I believe it's the highest population country in South America.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a big deal.
Yeah. All right. Well, before we get to my story here, we're going to take a quick break to hear from our show sponsors. Strata is your solution for securing on-prem and cloud apps without the hassle of refactoring. Modernize legacy systems with MFA or passwordless authentication and ensure continuous identity availability across multi-cloud environments. Say goodbye to tech debt and hello to seamless integration. Strata helps you reduce stress and gain control over your identity architecture, enhancing security and efficiency. Join industry leaders like 3M, Navy Federal, and Kroger who trust Strata for their identity needs. Visit strata.io/cyberwire to share your biggest identity challenge and receive a complimentary pair of AirPods Pro. Don't miss out. Transform your identity management today at strata.io/cyberwire. And our thanks to Strata for being a longtime friend and supporter of this podcast. All right, and we are back. My story this week is another really interesting one here. An appeals court, I believe this is the Third Circuit?
Yes, Third Circuit, which is East Coast, New Jersey, Pennsylvania.
So they have come at TikTok. TikTok had this thing that was making the rounds called the Blackout Challenge. And we've seen challenges come and go over the years, over the decades, really. There
the
was
Tide Pod Challenge.
Yeah, there was the Ice Water Challenge.
That one generally didn't kill people.
No. There was a Cinnamon Challenge. There's been lots of them. This one was particularly horrible. This was the Blackout Challenge, which had to do with people asphyxiating themselves and videotaping it and posting it on TikTok. And a young man died. 10-year-old Nyla Anderson died as a result of this. And needless to say, the family members went after TikTok for this. And TikTok claimed that they were protected by Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which up until this point, I think all of us would agree there was little question that TikTok was within their rights to do that. And that was a legitimate defense.
You'd think the case would have been done right there.
That's right.
Yeah.
So
pull the 230 card.
This went to the Third Circuit Court, and they have decided that the algorithmic recommendations that a platform like TikTok makes are not protected by Section 230. That the platform is protected for the content it hosts, but not for the algorithmic decisions that it makes.
Yeah, so that is the key distinction here, is that the person who died as a result of this Blackout Challenge found the challenge via the algorithm. It was not on her own preferred, chosen content. It was not among the people she had previously followed, for example. And in that sense, it does go beyond Section 230. The judge says something really interesting here, which to me is hard to deny, that these tech companies can't have it both ways. Because in other cases, they say, when we create our algorithm, that is us producing content. And that helps them in other legal cases. If that's going to be true in other legal cases, it should also be true for Section 230 purposes. They should be held as a publisher and not as a simple platform of the content. Or I should say they should be held as a creator of that content and not a simple platform for this content. And that's why I think this case is going to have really wide-ranging impact. The district court has been instructed to rehear the case as a result of this decision. And we could see it back up at the Third Circuit or potentially up at the Supreme Court. We haven't had a satisfying Section 230 case in front of the Supreme Court. All of the ones that have been decided recently, I think, leave a lot to interpretation about the reach of Section 230 now that we're 30 years into it. And this would be a really interesting one to reach the doorstep of the Supreme Court.
Yeah, and there's been so much discussion about this after this. I'm not surprisingly, but the two sides of this, there are folks who are saying that it's really not possible for the internet as we know it to function if this is the new normal of how it's going to function. If these platforms are responsible for their algorithmic recommendations, that it's no longer business as usual. What do you make of that?
I think that's absolutely correct. As much as we say we hate algorithms, we all rely on them. We get the content that the social media companies curate specifically for us based on the videos that we've chosen to watch. And as a result, it's more addictive and entertaining. I mean, that's how algorithms work. I get really specifically curated Facebook Reels right now. And it's done a really excellent job. It has a lot of stuff I'm interested in, mostly sports, random rankings of historical music albums.
Mm-hmm.
It's very specific to my interests. And if you were to take away that algorithm and I was just shown a random set of unrelated videos, chances are I would lose interest quickly and I'd probably leave the platform. So these algorithms work as much as we're critical of them. And if this type of decision were upheld to the United States Supreme Court, then the fact that companies would take on significant legal liability for the use of these algorithms, they would be disincentivized to use them in the first place. The bark wouldn't be worth the bite. So I think that would have profound consequences on our ability to enjoy social media content, even if we think that Section 230 has been expanded beyond its original purpose.
Don't you think that an argument can be made that this is a correction for the uninhibited scaling and expansion of these platforms by way of algorithm? In other words, if I am able to have a recommendation engine that requires virtually no human oversight, right? Maybe human oversight at its initial design, maybe checking in along the way, but there's nobody looking at what are we recommending to Ben Yellen today, or what are we recommending to Dave Bittner today, right? That doesn't happen.
They don't meet in a room and curate recommendations specifically for us.
But there's nobody looking over that, and we've been okay with that because of the benefits that you outline. Overall, it works. It's not perfect. For some reason, Facebook has decided that I really want to install in my car a horn that is as loud as a diesel train engine. I have no idea.
Don't know where that comes from.
Don't know where it comes from, but it's consistent. And as quickly as I try to scroll by those ads, because I have no interest in that whatsoever, somewhere along the lines, it thinks that that's something I want. Whatever. It's a nuisance. But when it goes past being a nuisance and we're actually talking about people dying, it could lead to an appropriate recalibration.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot to be said about a balance, that we've gone too far in the other direction where we're immunizing everything that these social media companies do so they don't feel any sense of responsibility. I think there's something to that. I just think from a pure user perspective, maybe not even from a moral perspective, but from a user's perspective, this would make these social media sites less desirable to me. And people would say, well, are they going to be that concerned about lawsuits that they'll completely shut down their algorithms? I think yes, because so many bad things can happen resulting directly from these algorithms. It's not just this death. You could think of almost an infinite number of scenarios where these companies would incur legal liability for a wide array of people getting injured, defamation, libel, really everything, criminal activity. I do think that from a user's perspective, it would be a big loss. But I'm still not entirely sure from a policy perspective if it would be such a bad thing, because I do think that balance is really important.
Do you think we could see maybe no algorithms for kids?
That might make a huge difference. That could be something that Congress could implement, that Section 230 does not apply for algorithmic creations intended for minors. That could be involved in this effort to pass some of these child online safety measures, which have stalled in Congress. I think that might be a good compromise, because adults seemingly can understand that just because something is fed into their feed doesn't mean that you should try and copy it.
Yeah.
But we're talking about what? Was it a 9-year-old here?
Yeah, 9 or 10.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to be, sadly, far more impressionable. So I think that could be a good middle ground for a solution.
What if you made the algorithms opt in, and you had some kind of like the thing you have to sign off on when you go bungee jumping? Chances are
do not sue us.
Right. Well, by participating in this activity, you are likely going to die. You acknowledge, that sort of thing.
Yeah. I have a hard time with that, just because nobody would. We already agreed at terms and conditions, and nobody reads them.
Right.
You think a 10-year-old is actually gonna?
No. I'm saying in addition to. So let's let's give ourselves I'm saying for adults, let's give ourselves the ban for kids. No more algorithms for kids. But for adults, if you made it opt-in, so the default is no algorithmic recommendations, but for someone like you who really thinks that it adds to the value of the platform, you can click through and say, yes, I want the algorithms, and I understand the potential perils involved in that.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. I think you're full of good ideas today.
Mr. Zuckerberg, please give me a call.
Yeah. And a check would be nice too.
Well, yeah, you can't
We'll
have
start
everything.
with the call. We'll start with the call and then the check comes.
Right. Just get rid of the ads for freight train horns on my Facebook feed.
That's such a bizarre... I wonder what you searched in the first place.
I have no idea. That is the least, I'm
you
someone
could not
who,
have less interest in that
no,
subject.
and I hardly ever use my car horn. I'm not an angry car horn tutor. Just not who I am.
Well, for all our listeners out there, now you know what to get Dave for Christmas this year.
Yeah.
The loudest horn imaginable.
Yeah, some kind of freight train air horn that you can hear in the next county over. That's my deepest desire.
Yep.
How do you think this plays out then? I mean, is this likely headed for the Supreme Court?
I would say first we'd need to see a circuit split on this. We've talked about that with previous cases. If some other circuit had a very similar case related to liability for an injury taking place to a minor, but that was covered by Section 230 protection, then I think we're on a collision course with the Supreme Court. We still might get there even just with this one case, but I think it's more likely that it'll take some development of this area of the law before it makes it up to the Supreme Court. So, unfortunately, like I always say, the legal system moves very slowly, and I don't think we'll get a satisfying resolution to this issue for a few years. But if you do live in the Third Circuit, this is now binding. So certainly, these social media companies will take notice. In the meantime, unless this is reheard en banc by the entire Third Circuit panel, right now this has precedential value. So if you do live in that Third Circuit and the northern mid-Atlantic states, then this is the rule in your jurisdiction.
So if I'm a social media company, do I change the way I'm doing business in that area? Or does it just mean that have much greater potential liability now?
At this point, it's probably has to do with your greater liability. I don't know if they're going to change their business practices.
Right.
It might not be worth it for them. If you're making X amount of money through the use of algorithms and you have to pay X amount of damages for the isolated number of injuries within that particular jurisdiction, maybe it's not worth it to them. But I'm certainly interested to see if any of these companies make changes based on this decision.
Another thing that I think is worth pointing out is that the folks who are critical of this decision, I've seen particularly coverage over on TechDirt, just with a laundry list of prior cases and precedents that just saying that the Third Circuit just got it wrong.
Right.
Legally, this is just legally wrong. It's a novel conclusion, but there's just a boatload of prior legal precedents saying you just blew it here.
Yeah, I think that's largely correct. Most of the case law, including by the district court, seem to say that this was covered by the Communications Decency Act. I think the one difference, though, is we now have these other Supreme Court decisions. They mentioned Moody v. Net Choice, the dual net choice decisions that we saw in the last Supreme Court term. That related to content moderation laws passed by the states. And in those cases, the social media companies asserted First Amendment interests in their creative algorithms. And if they are asserting that interest and claiming that they have the right under the First Amendment to make editorial decisions, they should be held legally responsible for those decisions. I can understand why the fact that those Supreme Court decisions were decided the way they were might be an impetus for these appeals court judges to rule differently in this decision than they otherwise would have. But I'm not sure that that's going to hold. I'm not sure the Supreme Court agrees. So in that sense, we just have to see how it plays out.
Yeah. All right. Well, we will keep an eye on it, of course. And we would love to hear from you. If there's something you'd like us to consider for the show, you can email us. It's caveat@n2k.com. And that is Caveat, brought to you by N2K Cyberwire. We'd love to know what you think of this podcast. Your feedback ensures we deliver the insights that keep you a step ahead in the rapidly changing world of cybersecurity. If you like our show, please share a rating and review in your favorite podcast app. Please also fill out the survey in the show notes or send an email to caveat@n2k.com. We're privileged that N2K Cyberwire is part of the daily routine of the most influential leaders and operators in the public and private sector, from the Fortune 500 to many of the world's preeminent intelligence and law enforcement agencies. N2K makes it easy for companies to optimize your biggest investment, your people. We make you smarter about your teams while making your teams smarter. Learn how at n2k.com. This episode is produced by Liz Stokes. Our executive producer is Jennifer Iben. The show is mixed by Trey Hester. Our executive producer is Brandon Karp. Peter Kilpie is our publisher. I'm Dave Bittner.
And I'm Ben Yellen.
Thanks for listening.